Have you ever stopped working on a good project, not because it failed, but because trying to do it better slowly became exhausting? This is more common than people admit, and it rarely happens because of laziness or lack of discipline. Most of the time, it happens because the project started demanding psychological energy before the mind was ready to sustain it. In the beginning, everything feels light. The idea feels alive, promising, and open. There is excitement, curiosity, and a sense of possibility that makes starting feel natural. At this stage, the brain is focused on imagination rather than responsibility. You are not yet thinking about consistency, delivery, or long-term effort. You are thinking about what this project could become, not what it will require from you every day. This matters because the brain reacts very differently to possibility than it does to obligation. When something is still an idea, effort feels optional. You engage because you want to, not because you have to. Dopamine comes from anticipation, from imagining outcomes, from the sense of novelty. That chemical reward makes the early phase feel energizing, even if very little has actually been built. The problem begins when caring increases faster than stability. As soon as the project starts to matter more, the desire to improve quietly turns into an expectation to deliver. What was once an experiment becomes something that needs to prove itself. What was once flexible becomes evaluated. And this shift often happens without any conscious decision. One day you are simply doing something, and suddenly you are supposed to be doing it well. At this point, many people raise their internal standards too early. They want the second step to look like a finished product. They want consistency before they have built rhythm. They want quality before volume has done its work. The intention behind this is usually positive. People want to respect their own potential, but psychologically, the timing is wrong. When standards rise before habits exist, effort stops feeling exploratory and starts feeling monitored. The mind begins to watch itself closely. Each action is compared to an internal ideal that does not yet match reality. Instead of noticing progress, attention shifts to what is missing, what is uneven, what could have been done better. This constant self-evaluation increases cognitive load, even when the actual work has not become harder. Expectation does not feel harmful at first. It often feels like growth, responsibility, or commitment. But expectation changes the emotional meaning of effort. What once felt voluntary begins to feel mandatory. When effort feels mandatory, resistance increases. Not because the person does not care, but because the brain interprets constant self-pressure as a form of threat. This is where many people misunderstand what is happening. They assume motivation is disappearing, when in reality motivation is being buried under pressure. The activity itself has not changed, but the emotional cost of engaging with it has increased. Over time, the brain begins to associate the project with tension instead of curiosity, and avoidance becomes more likely. Perfectionism often appears at this stage, but not as a desire to create something beautiful. It appears as a protective response. High standards create a reason to pause. If the result is not good enough yet, stopping feels justified. Delaying feels responsible. In this way, perfectionism becomes less about excellence and more about avoiding the discomfort of feeling insufficient while continuing. Another factor that accelerates this process is opening too many fronts at once. When motivation is high, expansion feels logical. New ideas appear, new directions seem possible, and the brain wants to pursue all of them. But cognitively, this fragments attention. Each context switch requires mental energy. Each unfinished task stays active in the background. Over time, this constant switching creates fatigue that is often mistaken for lack of passion. What starts as ambition slowly turns into overload. The mind does not get enough repetition in any single direction to build familiarity or ease. Without familiarity, effort remains expensive. Without ease, consistency becomes fragile. And when consistency feels fragile, doubt grows quickly. This is why many projects do not fail because the idea was bad or the person was incapable. They failed because psychological pressure arrived before psychological safety. The brain was asked to perform before it was allowed to stabilize. And when that happens, disengaging often feels like relief, even when the person still believes in the project. Understanding this changes how you interpret early struggle. The problem is not that you expect too much from yourself in general. The problem is that expectation arrived too early in the process. In the beginning, progress does not require intensity or pressure. It requires repetition, tolerance for imperfection, and an environment where effort feels safe enough to continue. To understand why so many projects become exhausting too early, it helps to look at how the brain actually handles motivation and effort. Most people believe motivation is something you either have or do not have, but neurologically, motivation is a temporary state created by specific conditions. When those conditions change, the feeling changes as well, even if your values remain the same. At the beginning of a project, the brain is rewarded by novelty. New ideas, new directions, and new possibilities activate dopamine, the chemical associated with anticipation and engagement. This dopamine is not a reward for finishing anything. It is a reward for imagining what could happen. That is why the early phase feels energizing even if very little concrete progress has been made. As time passes, novelty fades. The brain stops receiving the same chemical reward from the idea alone. At this point, motivation is supposed to shift from anticipation to habit. But habit requires repetition in a low-pressure environment. If pressure enters before habit forms, the brain interprets effort as cost rather than reward. This is where expectation begins to interfere. Expectation increases self-monitoring. The brain starts tracking performance instead of process. Instead of asking, "Did I show up today?" it asks, "Was this good enough?" That question sounds harmless, but neurologically it changes the experience of effort. Self-monitoring increases cognitive load, which makes even simple actions feel heavier. When cognitive load stays high for too long, the brain looks for relief. Relief does not come from improvement because improvement takes time. Relief comes from disengagement. This is why abandoning a project often feels strangely calming at first. The nervous system relaxes because the pressure is gone. The brain interprets this relief as a signal that stopping was the right decision, even if the long-term consequences are negative. This creates a dangerous loop. The mind learns that starting feels good, pressure feels bad, and stopping brings relief. Over time, this pattern trains avoidance. Not because the person lacks discipline, but because the brain is optimizing for short-term emotional safety. Without awareness, this loop repeats across different projects, goals, and even relationships. Perfectionism plays a key role in this process. Contrary to popular belief, perfectionism is not primarily about high standards. It is about reducing uncertainty. When standards are extremely high, there is always a reason to delay action. This delay protects the person from the discomfort of visible imperfection. In this sense, perfectionism is not ambition. It is a coping strategy. Another important factor is how the brain reacts to multiple commitments. Each active project occupies mental space, even when you are not working on it. Psychologically, unfinished tasks remain open loops. When too many loops are open at the same time, background stress increases. The stress is subtle but persistent. It reduces focus, drains emotional energy, and makes rest less effective. When people say they feel overwhelmed without knowing why, this is often the reason. The brain is carrying too many expectations at once. Even enjoyable projects begin to feel heavy because the mind never fully disengages. Instead of resting, it keeps switching contexts internally, which is exhausting. It is important to understand that none of this means something is wrong with you. These reactions are normal responses to pressure, evaluation, and cognitive overload. The brain evolved to conserve energy and avoid prolonged stress. When effort becomes associated with constant self-judgment, the brain does what it is designed to do. It looks for a way out. This is why advice like "just be more disciplined" rarely works in these situations. Discipline does not remove cognitive load. It does not lower self-monitoring, and it does not create psychological safety. Without addressing these factors, pushing harder often increases resistance instead of progress. Real progress becomes possible when effort is decoupled from constant evaluation. When the brain is allowed to focus on repetition instead of performance, effort becomes cheaper. Over time, familiarity replaces tension. Actions require less energy, and consistency stops feeling like a fight. Understanding this does not mean you should lower your standards forever. It means standards need timing. Before quality, there needs to be stability. Before evaluation, there needs to be rhythm. When the order is reversed, even strong ideas struggle to survive. Once you understand how expectation and pressure interfere with motivation, the next step is not to force yourself to push harder. The goal is to change how your brain experiences effort. This does not require radical discipline or dramatic mindset shifts. It requires small structural decisions that protect consistency before quality becomes the priority. One of the most effective changes is separating effort from evaluation. Most people judge their work while they are doing it. This creates constant self-monitoring, which increases cognitive load. A simpler approach is deciding in advance that certain sessions are for showing up only, not for improving, not for refining, just for repetition. Evaluation can exist, but it should happen later in a different mental space. Another important strategy is lowering expectation without lowering commitment. This sounds contradictory, but it is not. Commitment is about returning. Expectation is about outcome. When expectation is low, the brain feels safer engaging. When commitment is clear, consistency becomes possible. You are not asking yourself to perform well today. You are asking yourself to return tomorrow. Reducing the scope of what counts also matters. Many people quit because they believe progress must look impressive to be valid. This belief creates pressure that the brain resists. Progress that feels small but repeatable is far more powerful than progress that feels significant but unsustainable. The brain adapts through frequency, not intensity. Another overlooked factor is deciding how many fronts you will allow yourself to have. Every active project carries a psychological cost. Even enjoyable projects compete for attention and emotional energy. Choosing to focus on fewer things is not a lack of ambition. It is a way to protect depth and continuity. When the brain knows where its energy is allowed to go, resistance decreases. It also helps to redefine what improvement means in the early stages. Improvement does not mean better results. It means lower resistance. If showing up feels slightly easier than it did last week, that is improvement. If starting requires less mental negotiation, that is improvement. These are subtle signals, but they indicate that the brain is adapting. Another useful practice is delaying optimization. Many people try to optimize too early because it feels productive, but optimization increases evaluation. Evaluation increases pressure. Pressure increases avoidance. Instead of optimizing how something looks or performs, focus on stabilizing when and how it happens. Once stability exists, optimization becomes easier and less threatening. It is also important to accept that motivation will fluctuate even in healthy systems. Waiting to feel motivated before acting keeps you dependent on internal states you do not control. Acting in a way that feels emotionally safe allows motivation to follow rather than lead. This reverses the usual struggle. One of the most protective shifts is changing the internal language you use around your project. Instead of framing it as something you must succeed at, frame it as something you are practicing. Practice allows mistakes without identity threat. Performance does not. The brain relaxes when identity is not on the line. Over time, these changes do something important. They reduce the emotional cost of continuing. When effort feels cheaper, consistency becomes more natural. And when consistency exists, quality emerges almost automatically. Not because you forced it, but because the system allowed it. The risk of abandoning a project is rarely highest at the beginning. It is highest when expectations quietly outgrow stability. Preventing abandonment is not about pushing through discomfort. It is about preventing unnecessary discomfort from accumulating in the first place. If you are starting something new, the most useful question is not whether you are doing it well. The more useful question is whether you are creating conditions that make returning easier. When returning is easy, improvement follows. When returning feels heavy, even good ideas struggle to survive. Projects grow when they are treated as processes, not tests. When effort is allowed to be imperfect, repetition builds strength. And when the brain feels safe enough to continue, progress stops feeling like a fight and starts feeling like movement.